Iron Road to Victory. The U.S. Army from D-Day to Berlin. At dawn on June 6, 1944, the gray waters of the English Channel rolled beneath a sky thick with cloud and anticipation. More than 5,000 ships, landing craft, and transports formed the largest amphibious invasion armada in human history. On their decks stood young Americans, farm boys from Iowa, steelworkers from Pennsylvania, students, mechanics, and fathers, each bound for a narrow strip of French sand that would be remembered forever as Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Operation Overlord had begun. The planning for this day stretched back years, since the dark days of 1940 when Hitler's armies had swept across Western Europe. Allied leaders had known that liberation would come only through a direct assault on the continent. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, carried the weight of this responsibility. Beside him were the commanders of the U.S. First Army, Lieutenant General Omar N. Bradley, and the British Second Army under General Miles Dempsey. The Americans would land on the western beaches, Utah and Omaha, while British and Canadian forces struck to the east.
Shortly after midnight, the first phase commenced. From English airfields, over 800 C-47 transport aircraft lifted into the night, carrying thousands of paratroopers of the U.S. 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. Their mission? To seize bridges, crossroads, and causeways behind the beaches, preventing German reinforcements from reaching the coast. In the darkness above Normandy, tracer fire streaked upward as German gunners opened on the descending planes. Many paratroopers were scattered miles from their drop zones, some drowned in flooded fields deliberately created by the enemy. Yet, by dawn, enough objectives were secured to sow confusion behind the German lines. At 6:30 a.m., the landing craft ramp doors crashed down into waist-deep surf. On Omaha Beach, the men of the U.S. 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions were met by murderous fire from machine gun nests dug into the bluffs. German 352nd Infantry Division, hardened veterans of the Eastern Front, held commanding positions overlooking the sand. Many American soldiers were cut down before they could reach cover. Tanks and engineers were destroyed by mines and obstacles. Communications faltered and chaos ruled the shoreline. But slowly, inch by inch, small groups of men crawled forward, scaling cliffs, tossing grenades, silencing bunkers. By noon, American flags rose above the bluffs. Omaha was theirs at a terrible cost, over 2,000 casualties.
To the west, at Utah Beach, General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr., the eldest son of the former president, led the 4th Infantry Division ashore. His landing craft had drifted off course nearly 2,000 yards south of the planned sector. Assessing the situation, Roosevelt calmly said, "We'll start the war from right here," and began organizing the assault. By nightfall, Utah was secure, and the link with the airborne troops inland had been made. Behind the beaches, the Norman countryside, hedgerows called bocage, turned every field into a miniature fortress. Each hedgerow had thick earth embankments topped with centuries-old brush, providing perfect concealment for German defenders. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. The U.S. First Army advanced toward Carentan, St. Lo, and Coutances, facing fanatical resistance from German paratroopers, panzer divisions, and the feared 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Götz von Berlichingen. Through June and July, the Americans learned to fight the bocage. Engineers welded steel prongs to the front of Sherman tanks, nicknamed rhino tusks, allowing them to break through the hedgerows without exposing themselves. Artillery coordination improved. Fighter bombers such as the P-47 Thunderbolt prowled overhead, blasting enemy strongpoints with rockets and bombs. Still, rain and mud slowed the advance. St. Lo was reduced to rubble before finally falling on July 18th. At the same time, to the east, the British and Canadians fought bitterly around Caen against the elite Panzerlehr and 12th SS Hitlerjugend divisions. Casualties were immense, but each day drew the Allies closer to their breakout.
By late July, General Bradley prepared Operation Cobra, the plan to shatter the German line west of St. Lo and open the road toward Brittany and the heart of France. On July 25, nearly 1,500 heavy bombers of the U.S. 8th Air Force dropped over 4,000 tons of explosives on a narrow front. The bombardment devastated the German positions, but also tragically caused friendly fire casualties among American troops. Despite confusion, armored columns surged forward. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions punched holes through the enemy's shattered defenses. Within days, averages fell, and the long-awaited breakout began. The Germans, under Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, attempted to counterattack near Mortain. They committed their last reserves, Panzerlehr and remnants of SS divisions, in a desperate bid to reach the coast and cut off the advancing Americans. But Allied air power ruled the sky. P-47s and Typhoons turned the roads into graveyards of burning tanks. The counterattack collapsed, and the Germans found themselves trapped in what became known as the Falaise Pocket.
Between August 12 and 21, 1944, the pocket closed. Over 50,000 German troops were captured. Countless more lay dead along the roads, their equipment destroyed. What remained of the once mighty Wehrmacht in France was in full retreat toward the Seine River. Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944, after 4 years of occupation. The jubilant city welcomed General Charles de Gaulle and Allied columns rolling down the Champs-Élysées. The U.S. Army had done in 2 months what many thought would take half a year. Yet ahead lay the daunting task of crossing France, breaching the German frontier, and facing an enemy that, though battered, was far from beaten. The iron road to victory had only just begun. By September 1944, the Allies stood on the borders of Germany itself. The summer offensive had driven the Wehrmacht from Normandy, across the Seine, through Paris, and into Belgium. American columns raced eastward, fueled by hope, vengeance, and an unshakable belief that the war might end by Christmas. Yet, as General Omar Bradley knew, wars rarely obey optimism. The rapid advance strained logistics to the breaking point. Fuel and ammunition had to be hauled hundreds of miles from Normandy's beaches over wrecked roads and bridges. The famous Red Ball Express, a massive convoy system operated largely by African-American truck drivers, ran day and night, ferrying supplies to the front. Without them, the advance would have stopped cold. But even so, gasoline shortages plagued the spearheads. The U.S. Third Army, under General George S. Patton, was often forced to halt, not by the enemy, but by empty fuel tanks. Across the front, Allied strategy began to diverge. British Field Marshal Montgomery pressed for a single, decisive thrust through the Netherlands into northern Germany, while the Americans favored a broad front advance along the entire line. Eisenhower, balancing egos and logistics, chose the latter. It would prove costly in time, but would prevent any one sector from being dangerously overextended.
In early September, Patton's Third Army crossed the Moselle River and drove toward Metz, a fortress city dating back to Roman times. The Germans had fortified the surrounding hills with bunkers and artillery. Rain turned fields to quagmires, and progress slowed to a crawl. "We can take Metz," Patton wrote in his diary, "but we'll have to kill Germans to do it." The siege lasted through November, and only after weeks of brutal fighting did the Americans finally capture the city. Farther north, the U.S. First Army advanced into the Hurtgen Forest, a dark, tangled maze of fir trees, ravines, and minefields near Aachen. The fighting here, from September through December 1944, would become one of the most grueling battles of the entire Western Front. The forest was a natural fortress. Artillery shells detonated in the treetops, showering lethal splinters on soldiers below. Mud, cold, and constant rain turned foxholes into graves. Units were chewed up without gaining ground. Yet the Americans held on, learning again that the price of victory was often measured in blood and endurance. Aachen itself, the first German city to fall to the Western Allies, was taken after house-to-house fighting in October 1944. It was symbolic, proof that Hitler's thousand-year Reich was being invaded from the West. But Hitler had no intention of surrendering. He was already planning one last, desperate counteroffensive.
As December approached, the Western Front seemed quiet. The Germans appeared broken. American troops rested, resupplied, and rotated through the Ardennes, a forested region of Belgium and Luxembourg considered a quiet sector. But beneath the snow-laden pines, Hitler was mustering his final gamble, Operation Wacht am Rhein, the Battle of the Bulge. At dawn on December 16, 1944, the calm was shattered by the thunder of over 1,600 German artillery guns. Under cover of dense fog, 3 German armies smashed into the thin American lines. Panzer divisions spearheaded by the 6th SS Panzer Army surged forward. The objective? Seize the Belgian port of Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force a negotiated peace. The Americans were caught off guard. Entire regiments were surrounded or overrun. In towns like St. Vith, Malmedy, and Bastogne, desperate defensive stands erupted. The massacre at Malmedy, where SS troops murdered more than 80 American prisoners, hardened resolve across the front. In Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division, cut off and surrounded, refused to surrender. When the Germans demanded their capitulation, General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied with a single word: nuts. The weather grounded Allied aircraft for the first critical days, allowing the Germans to advance. But logistics once again became their undoing. Lacking fuel, many panzer columns stalled. When the skies finally cleared on December 23rd, Allied fighter bombers roared overhead, devastating German convoys. Patton's Third Army pivoted north in a remarkable maneuver, covering nearly 100 miles in 48 hours to relieve Bastogne on December 26th. It was one of the most brilliant operational moves of the war. By January 1945, the bulge in the Allied line had been erased. The Germans had spent their last reserves of armor and manpower. The Western Allies had lost 80,000 men, the Germans nearly 100,000. Hitler's gamble had failed. The road to Germany lay open. In February, the Allies crossed the Siegfried Line, the formidable belt of bunkers, dragon's teeth, and pillboxes guarding the German heartland. Engineers blasted paths through minefields, tanks clawed over obstacles under heavy fire. The U.S. Ninth Army reached the Ruhr River, while the First and Third Armies converged on the Rhine, the last great natural barrier to the German interior. The Rhine had always been a symbol of defense, of heritage, of the Reich itself. On March 7, 1945, in a stroke of luck that stunned both sides, American troops of the 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact. The Germans had rigged it with explosives, but the charges failed to detonate. Within minutes, GIs swarmed across, securing the far bank. Eisenhower immediately ordered every available unit to exploit the breach. Within 10 days, 5 bridgeheads were established along the Rhine. Germany's western wall had crumbled. To the south, Patton's Third Army crossed near Oppenheim, driving eastward in a relentless pursuit.
Town after town fell. Mainz, Darmstadt, Würzburg. Civilians emerged from cellars waving white flags. Entire German divisions surrendered by the thousands. To the north, Montgomery launched Operation Plunder, a massive river crossing supported by paratroopers and amphibious vehicles. By late March, the Allies had trapped nearly 300,000 German troops in the Ruhr pocket. Eisenhower's strategy was clear: encircle and destroy organized resistance west of the Elbe, then halt and let the Soviets take Berlin. It was a political decision as much as a military one. The war in Europe was entering its final chapter.
April 1945. The end was near, but death still walked the roads of Europe. The American armies pressed forward through the heart of Germany, past cities reduced to rubble, through forests heavy with smoke, and across fields littered with the wreckage of a once mighty Wehrmacht. The enemy was collapsing, yet in many pockets they fought on with the fanaticism of despair. As Patton's Third Army advanced into central Germany, his troops encountered scenes that would haunt them forever. Near the town of Ohrdruf, they stumbled upon a camp surrounded by barbed wire and the stench of death. It was a subcamp of Buchenwald, the first concentration camp liberated by American forces. Emaciated prisoners, skeletons barely able to stand, staggered forward to greet their liberators. Corpses lay stacked like cordwood. Patton, hardened by years of combat, turned away and vomited. Eisenhower, after visiting the camp, ordered every available soldier and local civilian to see it with their own eyes. "Get it all on record now," he said grimly. "Get the films, get the witnesses, because somewhere down the road, some bastard will say this never happened." Further north, the U.S. Ninth Army linked with Soviet forces advancing from the east along the Elbe River near Torgau on April 25, 1945. It was a moment of triumph and unease. The soldiers of two vastly different worlds, American and Soviet, met in the ruins of Hitler's empire, shaking hands on the shattered bridge at Torgau. The war in Europe was effectively over, but the politics of the coming Cold War were already in motion.
In the south, Patton's forces reached the Czech border. His men captured tens of thousands of prisoners daily, entire German armies laying down their arms. Yet even as surrender became inevitable, Nazi diehards continued to fight or flee. Some sought refuge in the Alps, hoping for a mythical national redoubt. Others simply tried to survive the chaos of collapse. The highways were clogged with refugees, soldiers, civilians, and prisoners alike, all moving westward, desperate to surrender to the Americans rather than the Soviets. In western Germany, the once proud cities lay in ruins. Cologne, flattened by years of bombing, was a ghost of stone and dust. Frankfurt, Mainz, and Kassel burned. The industrial heart of the Ruhr, once the engine of Hitler's war machine, was now a field of twisted steel and smoking factories. German civilians, weary and broken, emerged from cellars to face the conquerors. To many Americans, they seemed both defeated and strangely relieved. The U.S. Army, disciplined and efficient, moved with a strange duality, destroying the remnants of resistance even as they fed and sheltered those who had been victims of their enemy's regime. Engineers rebuilt bridges, medical units treated civilians, and supply convoys delivered food where famine loomed. Amid the devastation, there was a sense that civilization itself had to be restored. As April waned, the news spread quickly through the ranks. Adolf Hitler was dead. On April 30, 1945, the dictator who had plunged the world into chaos took his own life in the bunker beneath Berlin. His empire, once spanning a continent, was now a burning ruin. German radio called for the defense of the fatherland to continue, but the illusion of victory had died with him.
In the first days of May, the remnants of the German High Command sought to surrender to the Western Allies. On May 7th, at Reims, France, General Alfred Jodl signed the unconditional surrender of all German forces in the presence of General Dwight D. Eisenhower's representatives. The ceasefire took effect the following day, May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Across the Allied world, church bells rang, crowds filled the streets, and tears of relief flowed freely. In Times Square, in London, in Paris, millions celebrated the end of 6 years of bloodshed. For the American soldiers who had marched the Iron Road to victory, the joy was tempered by memory. They had landed on the beaches of Normandy less than a year earlier, June 6, 1944, and fought through France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. They had endured freezing winters, relentless artillery, and the loss of brothers in arms. Of the over 16 million Americans who served in World War II, more than 400,000 never came home. For those who did, the war would never fully end. General Eisenhower, reflecting on the campaign, wrote, "The road to victory was long and hard. It was paved with the courage, endurance, and self-sacrifice of free men." Patton, ever the warrior, lamented that peace had arrived too soon. "I would give anything," he said, "to fight the Russians. Damn it, we had them by the tail." But the world had no stomach for another war. The guns fell silent, and a new order, divided between East and West, emerged from the ashes. In the months that followed, American occupation forces took up their duties. They governed, rebuilt, and bore witness. In Nuremberg, the architects of the Nazi regime were tried for crimes against humanity. The evidence of horror, camps, documents, photographs, spoke for itself. The world vowed, never again.
The Iron Road to victory had not been a single highway, but 1,000 paths walked by ordinary men in extraordinary circumstances. From the sands of Omaha Beach to the streets of Berlin, they had carried not just rifles and rations, but the burden of freedom itself. They were citizens turned soldiers, and when the job was done, they went home, to farms, factories, and families, carrying invisible scars and silent pride. Their legacy endures not in monuments or medals, but in the enduring peace that their courage purchased. For in the final reckoning, the American soldier's journey across Europe was more than a campaign. It was a testament to the belief that tyranny can be defeated, and that liberty, once fought for, must always be defended. And so ended the long march from Normandy's beaches to Berlin's ruins, the Iron Road to victory.